All right, so going to be working on knee rotations here. And I'm going to start off in a seated position. This is where I recommend, especially if you haven't done this exercise before, master this level first. Kind of consider this level one before you start going into other positions. So with this exercise, I'm going to use the ground, just like if you watch the ankle video. I'm going to use the ground for an extra point of stability to help me kind of learn, right, the mechanics and the movement that I want, from my knee joint. So again, my heel's going to lightly be touching the ground. I'm going to actively get into dorsiflexion at the ankle, so pulling the top of my foot towards my shins. And like I said, we want to internally rotate and externally rotate at the knee joint. It's not like the ankle and the hip, if you watch those videos, that you're gonna get 360 degrees of rotation. With this one, you're not gonna get nearly as much rotation as the joints above and below. So that's something that I want you to think about, because what happens is that we try to get as much range of motion here as we do at the ankle and at the hip. And usually when we try to do that, we're gonna compensate either at the ankle or at the hip for that range of motion. So that's often what I find when I'm coaching these classes, when I'm coaching my mobility classes, is that this is a really tough one for people to grasp. But once you understand it, and I'll go through a really good analogy that should help you really understand it really fast, of how this knee joint is going to operate, especially when it comes to internal rotation and external rotation. So like I said, heel lightly touching the ground. Now, the analogy that I like to use is I like to think about my shin sort of as a lighthouse. So I want to direct that light with my shins, right, or with my knee. So I'm going to start off by going into internal rotation, which is going to be coming in towards my midline. And so again, right now, that light is pointing straight forward. So I want to guide that light, right, towards my midline or to the right. So what I'm going to do is, right, I'm going to rotate at the shin bone. So now, right, the head of that shin is facing, right, towards my midline or to the right. Now I want to face away from my body. So you can see that my hip's not moving at all. If I was to be moving at the hip, you would be seeing my knee go like this. So that's not rotating at the knee, right? Even though it looks like my knee is moving, that's actually coming from the hip, okay? So be aware of that, right? Make sure that you're not moving side to side, because that's coming from the hip, right? The other thing that we want to look out for, especially as we internally rotate, is that your ankle is going to want to supinate here for the illusion of more range of motion, right? And when you externally rotate, your foot is going to want to pronate, right? Or your ankle is going to want to pronate. So be aware of what your ankle is doing, right? So that's why I like to kind of get into dorsiflexion. It's going to reduce the ability, or I should say, it's going to reduce the risk of compensating, okay? You're still going to be able to compensate, you just have to be aware of that. So again, keep those things in mind, all right? The other thing that I can do, right, because I'll see a lot of people who are just absolutely frozen at the knee. They don't have any mobility or active mobility whatsoever. So what they'll do is their knee will kind of just stay right in this straight position, and then they'll just be moving from the ankle or from the foot, right? So that's not what we want. So if I need to, I can use my hands to kind of guide my knee, right? So I'm internally rotated and then externally rotated, okay? So that's gonna allow you to develop that mind-muscle connection and establish, right, how it feels to actively take yourself through that range of motion. So then what you can do is, as you start practicing, right, is do it freely. So 100% active, externally rotated, and internally rotated. And again, like I said, we're directing that light with the knee joint. So even though it looks like my foot is directing traffic, it's really just coming along for the ride. as I work that range of motion. So look at the cadence as well, right? I'm going nice and slow, making sure that I can control my reps and being mindful of not compensating at the hip or at the ankle, right? So think about this exercise as kind of greasing the groove, and it's not where we're going to improve our mobility. It's really, again, we're just going to be finding that end range of motion and developing more control over the range of motion that we have. So if I was to improve the mobility or the amount of range of motion that I have in that particular joint, I would be doing something called pails and rails, which is going to be in another video. Okay, so that is the knee cars. Practice that, right? And if you want to progress, if you feel like that's too easy for you, what you can do is you can support your hip here by placing your hands on your hamstring, right? And now the heel is not touching the ground, and you go into internal rotation and external rotation here. Okay, so a little bit more challenging. You're going to have to actively stabilize, but those are the knee cars.